When West Edmonton Mall expanded for the first time in 1983, it brought along the opening of the mall's first major attractions, the second home of the Edmonton Oilers, known as the Ice Palace, and, of course, the world's largest indoor amusement park, Fantasyland. Though both small and tame by today's standards, at nearly 50,000 square feet, it was the world's largest indoor amusement park. Though realistically it only featured 10 rides and attractions, plus jumping fountains and assorted arcade and carnival games, it was still a one-of-a-kind attraction.
I remember the very first time we went to West Edmonton Mall, we were driving around the parking lot looking for a spot to park, and from the outside it's a fairly nondescript building, but we just couldn't wait to get inside and find out what was in there. To us as kids, West Edmonton Mall really wasn't a mall at all. When we got in there, what we saw was Fantasyland. We saw Bourbon Street. Sure, there were tons of stores for the adults, but to us, it was a theme park.
The scale of an indoor experience such as this was still very new, and it carried with it a relatively high level of novelty, which was likely why the park was made to the size and spec that it was. When it first opened, at least for a short while, it was considered complete. A polished, fully executed amusement park, made to resemble an old-fashioned carnival residing in the time of yesteryear. Steam engines, mountain paths, balloon rides, carousels, and pirate ships all tied the fantasy theme together. But when looking at the balloon race Ferris wheel, the kiddie bumper boats, and really the roster of rides in the park, it was clear who the target audience was: children.
I am the kid in the salmon-colored shirt. I was almost 3 years old, and those memories are very, very delightful with West Edmonton Mall.
But what about the bigger, badder, meaner mall customers? Those with money to spend, and those with an appetite for thrills. It became immediately clear that Fantasyland as it stood simply wouldn't do. Whether or not one would call this rollout of the park a misstep was irrelevant. There was an appetite for more. So, almost immediately after its initial opening, there were talks of expansion. And not just of Fantasyland itself, but of the mall in general. Edmonton-based 555 Corporation immediately started seeking provincial and municipal tax breaks. Their argument? The long-term economic benefits of their planned Phase 3 expansion, including the new list of mega attractions billed collectively as Canada Fantasyland, would far outweigh the tax breaks that they were seeking. It was a hard sell, especially to a city who had mixed feelings about West Edmonton Mall as it stood already, and its effects on the city. Among a segment of the local community, the shopping center was billed as the mall which killed Edmonton's downtown.
Downtown is really a thriving place to be.
Retailers in city centers spoke about how its existence, even at what at that time was the far western edge of Edmonton, was pulling customers away from the core.
It's good to get more people downtown and stuff, you know.
Yeah, move towards downtown instead of West Edmonton Mall.
And others in Edmonton argued that suburban shoppers don't really venture downtown to go shopping, not when so many alternatives existed throughout suburbia. Regardless of who was correct in this argument, the Gurmesians were well known for their tenacity when it came to business dealings.
Said to us that they have never seen anybody sell the way you guys sell. That you come in there and you put on pressure, you do it in public ways that they're not used to. And they're excited about it, but they're not used to it. They said that we've never seen salesmanship like this before.
555 took to the local papers to make their case, and though they faced an uphill battle, they were ultimately successful. And while the collective branding of Canada Fantasyland was eventually dropped in place of naming each attraction as its own, the amusement park's name was to remain Fantasyland. Well, for the foreseeable future anyway. Fast forward to today, if you look at 555's most famous center in the United States, the Mall of America, and the layout of its amusement park offering, Nickelodeon Universe, you might notice that it's a lot more fluid than that of West Edmonton Mall's amusement park. Its wide open space allows for patrons to roam freely in multiple directions. And the park emulates the bright, daytime feel with its expansive glass ceilings. Truth be told, it's a remarkably well laid out and well designed amusement space. And what gives it such a leg up against its sister park in Canada, at least in the layout department, is the fact that it was designed that way, in that space, from the very beginning, when it first opened its doors as Camp Snoopy in 1992.
You got to see it to believe it. Who told you you can't have it all? You'll have a ball. There's a place for fun in your life, Mall of America. There's a place for fun in your life, Mall of America.
Rewinding back to 1983, although talks of expansion started just after Fantasyland's opening, its original design was that of a complete amusement park. Its main entrance at one end, with a single main boardwalk traveling the length of the park to the other entrance. Expanding Fantasyland now meant that a large, open, multi-path layout, similar to that at Mall of America, was not really possible. Instead, the park would need to expand while conforming to the path restrictions of the existing layout. And so, that's how it came to be. A brand new amusement park. The world's largest indoor facility of its type was going to expand. And plans for the upcoming expansion were nothing short of remarkable. An expansion which would increase the size of the park multiple times over. An expansion which would take the concept of indoor, year-round amusement and shatter all expectations. Early concept art for the expansion showcased an extension of the old-timey fantasy theme. Warm colors, trees placed throughout, expansion of the mountain theming, and much more was laid out in the concept showcasing the new expansion of the park. On the reverse side of the previously established kids area, the majestic mountain would house long, curving slides. Colorful parachutes would lift and drop riders next to a large, decorative lake. And that lake would house a boat ride, pulling travelers along a set path where, like the expanded track for the Fantasyland Express, riders would enjoy views of the newest and most ambitious part of the park. Riders looking for more thrilling experiences would get their kicks too. According to the presented concept, a new roller coaster would run along the perimeter of the area, with helix sections over the lake, and paths through tunnels as well. The plan called for an installation of a Himalaya ride, the kind often seen at traveling carnivals, as well as a flying carpet attraction, which is also often seen at carnivals and fairs. And when reflecting back at these concepts, it's clear that they did a reasonable job of presenting what the park would eventually look like. When Fantasyland's expansion celebrated its grand opening in 1986, much of this original version remained true to its roots.
My first visit to Fantasyland was in 1987, just a few years after it opened. The best way I could describe the place is sensory overload. The sounds, the flashing lights, and decor, they were simply amazing and overwhelming. Upon entry, there were the amazing jumping fountains and sounds such as bells from the rail crossing and cacophony of noise from games and the rides themselves like the carousel. The color scheme, such as clouds and sky, mirrors, windows, and railings, provided an almost park-like setting that was classy, even including an indoor lake with boat rides and paddle boats.
One of the most striking visual concepts was the oversized water feature, located directly in the middle of the park. It featured the covered boat ride presented in the early concept art. These boats would travel on a predetermined track laid along the bottom of the lake. Each boat was attached to an underwater cable which would pull the vessel along. Just like the concept art called for, the roller coaster would speed overhead, and the track of the Fantasyland Express was expanded from its original version. It would now travel through rather frightening, dark tunnels and eventually circle the perimeter of the water. Both the coaster and the train would offer fantastic views of fountains, palm trees, rock-style islands, and the rest of Fantasyland. But if you wanted the best view of this new addition to the park, that was available from the parachute drop ride. Staying true to the plan, colorful parachutes would carry a pair of passengers to the ceiling of the park. This ride was nearly identical in operation to those seen at other famous amusement parks around the world. And finally, Fantasyland included a collection of more thrilling rides. The Disco Dynamo had an alternative theme, and it did reside in a different location than originally planned, but it fulfilled the original concept's promise of the Himalaya ride. The flying carpet, on the other hand, was replaced with a significantly different attraction. Instead of remaining right side up while riding a stylized Arabian-themed rug, riders would experience the Perilous Pendulum, a full 360-degree inverted loop, on a pirate-themed version of Intamin's looping starship. Although it was around first, the original flying galleon now had a bigger brother. In pretty much the same way they are for vehicles, developments, gadgets, and virtually everything, the concept plans for Fantasyland's expansion were more ambitious than what was eventually realized. One of the most prominent features of the artist's drawing was the gondola-style people mover. This type of ride was exceedingly popular at the time, and was featured in many other parks around the world. Riders were meant to ascend a tower, and embark on a circumnavigation tour around the skies of Fantasyland's newest edition. Sadly though, it was never brought to life at the park. The central water feature, while gorgeous, was originally envisioned to incorporate a waterfall. Dropping in a series of steps from the backside of the mountain, which is prominently seen in the Fantasy World Play Park, the water would eventually land in the central lake. This ambitious feature was, also, sadly, not included. Beyond these omissions, the completely enclosed styling of the area was left out of the project too. The cast iron architecture, which was representative of building styles in the late 18th up to the mid-19th century, though perfectly theme appropriate with the park's original phase, was not included to really any extent. And the extension of the building facades along the perimeter, as were included in the original Fantasyland, were not realized in the park's expansion. However, there were a few features in Fantasyland which weren't laid out in the concept. For one, a small children's ride dubbed the Kitty Caravan. Though the animal-themed swings hung from atop, similar to that of the Swing of the Century, the speed and experience was far closer to that of a miniature carousel. But aside from the architecture and the facades, the biggest and most glaring differences between the concept and the grand opening was the omission of the back wall, which separated the original phase from this new area. And, perhaps even more prominently, the omission of the eastern wall between what would be the fantasy theme of this area and a completely different theme encompassing the rest of the park's expansion. A section of the park which would bring with it the most iconic ride in Fantasyland, which also just happened to be one of the most intense roller coasters in the world. But for now, take the time to reflect on the execution of a groundbreaking concept. One which elevated Fantasyland from a mere children's wonderland to that of a thrilling amusement park. Remember the boats and the parachutes, the long winding slides, and the Fantasyland Express. Remember what could have been, from cast iron architecture to gondola-style people movers. And remember what was, the water, the fountains, and the Perilous Pendulum. Remember Fantasyland.